happy to introduce Hilary Davidson, and this is her second Fashion Theory Russia conference. The first one was held in St. Petersburg. So Hilary is chair of MA Fashion and Textile Studies at the Fashion Institute. Sorry, I just have to repeat for translators that I'm introducing our next speaker, Hilary Davidson, who is chair of the MA Fashion and Textile Studies at the Fashion Institute of Technology, New York, and an honorary associate at the University of Sydney. She was curator of fashion and decorative arts at the Museum of London and has lectured, broadcast, and taught across a wide range of dress and textile history expertise. Hilary is a consultant in archaeological textiles and for the Oxford English Dictionary, and she's on the editorial boards of Fashion Studies. So Hilary is going to talk on the past and the future, dress history and conservation as sustainability expertise.
Thank you so much. And I would also like to extend my thanks to the organisers, particularly Luda and Anastasia, for bringing me here. I'm delighted to be able to come in person and to share kind of new thoughts and research with you all. So I want to say that this talk is going to start out quite personal, but I assure you it's going to move to the intellectual. And I also want to say that it's a talk towards something, I think, rather than a finished piece of thinking. And I welcome thoughts on the direction that it's heading. So I grew up in Australia in the 1980s, and the first time I remember hearing about climate change and what would come to be called sustainability was in 1986, when chlorofluorocarbons were banned worldwide due to the hole in the ozone layer they were creating over Antarctica and the edges of my country. In 1988, I played The Spirit of the Earth in a school play about climate change, which luckily I'm not going to show you pictures of. So, during the 1990s, there were many television documentaries and science shows that included segments on how the environment would worsen by the year 2000, and certainly by 2020, if humans didn't change their ways of life and production. So as someone who many other people here has lived their life in the shadow of climate catastrophe, I am simultaneously tired of and angry about the current lack of any actual systemic, real and sustained change regarding overmaking and overbuying commodities and other unsustainable, environmentally destructive practices which have become normal globally across all areas of human endeavour. So, as I grew up and turned into a dress historian and curator, I have wondered a lot about what it is I can actually do about this situation. I don't think dress history is necessarily going to change the world. How can I harness my anger productively? I started studying for my own master's degree about the same time fast fashion started taking off, and my career has kept pace with the appalling rise of these tides of clothes, often quite literally, as the material cost of an industry that is one of many killing the planet. So, as a cheerfully cosmopolitan hippie, I've always been environmentally minded in my care of clothes, recycling and making and wearing second-hand clothing before it was vintage. Thinking about what I buy and from whom and how much. I'm also a skilled maker, and I can design and construct and decorate my own clothes and shoes. But these individual gestures and many more, as you know, are somewhat futile unless enacted en masse, and as ways to petition via spending for change from large corporations making money from overproduction. Ooh, that's exciting. During these opening decades of the 21st century, I've also been teaching fashion design students fashion history and cultures, including issues around ethics, sustainability, and the environment. I would take some glee in appalling these burgeoning clothing makers by assuring them that the world didn't need any more clothes made, before hitting them with the statistics around textile and clothing production and the myriad of devastating human and environmental impacts. They go on and on. And I'm sure I'm not alone in this kind of teaching experience, and I'm aware that many scholars here and elsewhere have much more direct experience in the areas of fashion, sustainability, and related environmental crises. So during these same last 20 odd years, sustainability has also been an increasingly fashionable word for fashion, although with little real change occurring. Words like eco-friendly, ethical, green, and the like appear everywhere in marketing, brand strategies, educational plans, and from large companies. We have also seen so many sustainable brands emerge, but they are still making new things and using resources. I feel that production is a difficult way to solve overproduction. So some sustainability efforts are perhaps semantics, such as reframing PVC and polyurethane imitation leather made from petrochemicals as vegan leather, often containing phthalates described by Greenpeace as the single most environmentally damaging type of plastic. There is frequent discussion of greenwashing for good reason. If eco-consciousness sells, then slapping a green label on something sells too, whether it has a connection with genuine sustainability efforts or not. I believe in the possibility of change to do with clothing, yet I am cynical that the change will happen. So what can I do with my care and anger and concern and genuine desire to help amongst all my hopeful cynicism? The point that I've got to, and the point of this talk, I'm sure you're pleased to hear it is one, is to try to pivot, as the buzzword goes, the perceptions of the past that I work with in order to help the future I hope for. So last year, I became chair of the MA degree in Fashion and Textile Studies, History, Theory, and Museum Practice, which kind of covers all my interests as a practitioner at FIT in New York. And I've joined an institution which has a Sustainability Council since 2008, and which has integrated the commitment to sustainability as part of the college's overall strategic plan. Rather delightfully, there's a rooftop natural dye garden that was created in 2014, and there's an extensive selection of undergraduate minors and majors in design, fashion and otherwise for students to choose from. In the graduate school where I am, there are other MA degrees in fashion design, exhibition and experience design, global fashion management, and cosmetics and fragrance marketing and management. So there's many educational paths to embed sustainability into the practices of people with future global influence and effect. But it is also very much more of an industry-focused institution. It's not a research university. And my degree is the most academic amongst the 7 in the graduate department. I'm surrounded by people chasing markets and getting business buy-in and support, hunting to realize the new, and sometimes I'm not quite sure that we know what our degree does, but it's fine. So it does make me feel a little staged by comparison, because this is very much, outward future focused. But then I thought about what so much of this business hunting is hunting for, and my views changed. The hunt for sustainability models for the future is often looking for techniques we already have expert knowledge in from the past. It's perhaps that sometimes people don't ask historians as the people who know, and we aren't necessarily part of the conversations to volunteer the information. I think there's largely a siloed distance between this kind of future in industry and the past in research, and I'm interested in how to bridge those gaps. Because sustainability in practice is dear to me, I started musing before I began the job about how I could make this academic degree play a part in the sustainability conversation. We have 2 tracks in our program, one for history and curation and one for textile conservation, and the students split after the first year. So I always feel like what we do and what we train people for is concerned with the wide world of fashion and clothing after it has been. So it's passed through this nexus of the kind of the avant-garde and what is new, with looking at the whole kind of spectrum of dress practices adorning the body, from haute couture to space suits. And the metaphor that I've often used to kind of continue on my C theme is that fashion, some of the Vogue shit here, is the wave that crashes and passes in current currents. And fashion historians and curators come along afterwards and pick things up off the beach, and we think about them and write about them, and sometimes we display them in cabinets. So the power of research is accessing what has already been done and what works and what didn't. I mean, there's the famous line about those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. And there is such richness for sustainable fashion thinking and making in the past. There's also the power of textile conservation. And one of the strengths of this field is the knowledge of what happens to textiles over a long time, sometimes a very long time. Conservators spend their lives working hard to stop degradation and decay, studying what causes fibers to break down, why and how plastics decay, and how to truly, deeply make, do, and mend so objects last and are cherished as long as possible. It is very, very slow fashion, sometimes encompassing thousands of years. So the main point of this talk is that in where I'm situated, I'm going to start arguing for a repositioning of fashion and dress historians and textile conservators as sustainability experts, and to find ways to bring our collective expertise into industry considerations. I choose these two areas particularly because they are fields of the students I'm shepherding into their own futures, and because of my positionality within an institution very concerned with the making, selling, and marketing of new clothes and accessories. This is the change I want to make within what is possible to me, but I'm bringing this idea to a wider audience in case it proves useful in other places too. And part of this work, I feel, is bridging a perceptual gap. The concept of kind of fashion is a complicated one, as we all know. I mean, very roughly, it sort of simultaneously invokes glamour and movement and newness, the contemporary globalism, sort of fun and sexiness, while also attracting critiques of superficiality, irrelevance, triviality, and sometimes pejorative femininity, amongst much else. And it's encapsulated in the way that marketing departments are keen to label anything to do with clothes as fashion, as anyone who has to deal with museum approaches to this knows, because fashion is attractive and it sells. But if future fashion is sexy, then I think history is not perceived so much that way. The past is by definition not modern and not contemporary. And the knowledge and practices of those who work with clothing in the past is sometimes, I think, sort of often seen as more relegated to the past. And I'd say there's a general feeling in popular culture of almost detritus, a curious interest, but a lack of really immediate relevance. And I feel the past is often positioned as a baseline against which our kind of modern innovation and progress, however we define that, is measured. I am concerned about how to bridge the gap and break down the silos so that industry decision makers think to come to scholars of the past for advice and inspiration on sustainability, and that we revalue the knowledges gained by working with historic objects to claim a place in discussions shaping the future. And how this can best happen, I'm not yet quite sure. But what gets missed from considerations about the past is the incredible skill and cleverness, the shrewd economies and thrift practices embodied in past clothing, which are invaluable lessons. Many of the choices about textile and garment making in the past were due to absolute constraint necessity. People had what they had to work with from the environmental and economic areas around them. And of course, there's been sort of trade and imports for millennia, and luxury good markets are as nearly as old as humanity. But I believe that studying the necessities of restraint may help us to relearn disciplines of restraint in the future, either to curb resource use or, more inevitably perhaps, work within increasingly limited resources. So there are other sort of manifestations of this idea around at the time. Looking at sort of the past as a sustainability practice for the future. So historics of Bernadette Banner's new book, for example, teaches readers turn of the 20th century sewing techniques, which she uses to make her own historical wardrobe. But this time it's actually phrased as sustainable, a sensible move, and one that takes the kind of the quite popular make, do and mend ethos of the 1940s, which is sort of often touted in current sustainable fashion discussions back a few decades. I would like to see more books and works like this in the future, harnessing the vast quantity of information about how historic clothes were produced into forms that are accessible and usable by a much wider general audience, and ideally somehow into commercial manufacturing. There's a lot of great information out there in personal blogs and web pages, but it's often geared towards costumers and reenactors. And I feel like there's so much to learn by going back sort of even further, particularly before the industrial revolutions in textile manufacturing changed the preciousness of cloth to the disposable commodity it is today. Students are often puzzled by the odd pieces and mismatched patching in 18th century garments, for example, which come from a need to use every piece of fabric, especially expensive silk, whose value is greater than these minor, steady interruptions. Exquisite 18th century Dutch darning samplers show that visible mending was always a valued skill, and that high-quality needlework can be found in mundane as well as the more appreciated decorative works. As a scholar and maker who spent lots of time amongst medieval and early modern clothing cultures, innovations in zero-waste cutting now bring me instantly back to the early Middle Ages, or the waste-free cutting of laboriously handmade textiles for Coptic tunics. I think about how the embroidered bands on even elite clothes were removable and attachable to new garments. The highly plebeian nature of cutting multiple shirts and shifts, which were the essential first washable layers of clothing for everyone for centuries, resulted in many tips and techniques for economically using all the fabric, like these cutting diagrams here. And once that garment was used up, its linen, hemp, or later cotton fibers were reused until the shredded remnants were collected to be made into paper. I'm showing just some varied examples, and I'm sure people can instantly think of many others. So many clothing styles were influenced by making with them with the ability to be changed and keeping the textiles intact, like kimono was to make. Selvages were preserved, triangular gauze and inset pieces carefully thought out, and scraps saved for the garment in case of future alterations. Many museums contain garments with histories of multiple lives, and Elizabeth Block highlights this sort of past to the future approach in a 2022 article about wealthy American women who bought French couture in the 19th century but then had it made and remade to preserve their investment. The past also shows us how good quality textiles last and can carry through generations. And the rise in kind of upcycling entrepreneurs this century works with clothes not designed to be remade. Perhaps one aspect of future sustainable design is creating for modularity with as little interference with the textile as possible in case of future reuse into presently unimaginable styles. So I'm aware, I feel like this talk is sort of couched in broad terms and generalizations, and it is, as I say, very much thinking towards its topic. And I'm not engaging with all of the kind of huge scientific and socio-cultural efforts to make the world more sustainable. And I also, do acknowledge and pay respect to the efforts of many peers and scholars who are making much larger noises and more immediate and effective changes about fashion sustainability. But I feel that my argument or my pivot here is also partly tied into current efforts of decolonisation and learning from indigenous and traditional knowledges in culture and how they inherently work productively with environments around them. The clothing and textile histories of Western dress, for want of a better word, I'm finding Euro-American quite productive, especially as in Sweden. The Western dress that forms this mainstay of fashion history, they also contain tacit material environments and ways of working productively with them. And looking at the past in this way also helps to address the lack of the majority of voices in history by acknowledging the skills of millions of labouring women and minorities. Part of the strength of historians and conservators lies in their ability to work directly with historic dress objects and read their creative, engineering and production messages not found in the textual record. So much of sustainable practice is about doing, not saying. When objects are the only surviving trace of non-literate peoples, which has been most of humanity for most of our history, we can read their intelligence in the work of their hands and think about how that intelligence can be applied now. So to kind of sum up, clothes used to be, on the whole, far more inherently sustainable. I mean, there are notable exceptions like fur, for example, which have devastated animal populations. But I think learning from this past can help us get back to the future. And while there's, I'm really excited about the developments in things like textiles bioengineered from living bacteria and algae and yeast and animal cells or fungi mycoproteins, and the innovations that are happening in recycling from waste material and clothes. And I'm particularly excited for what's going to happen when we can 3D print with actual threads, not plastic. There is also a huge body of wisdom of what was done that is waiting patiently for us to rediscover it. Not every strategy has to be invented anew. But this also requires people who have the knowledge of past fashion practices to articulate and spread it, and to keep sustainability education in mind when considering research outputs. And I've got some vague ideas for a conference around this in the future if anyone thinks they might be interested. So just to kind of end there, microplastics, for example, are a new and exciting environmental concern. They're small, but they build up. If this pivot or turn to fashion history as a sustainability expertise is a micro-practice I can contribute to changing the way the world is structured, then with any luck, it too will build up into something bigger and more positive. The past is an underutilized resource. Looking back can give ways to look forward, and experts in the dress past need to start emphasizing and sharing their skills to enhance fashion resistance and genuine sustainability as an imperative civilizational technique. Thank you.